As the war between the hangdogs and Caesar continued, the dead kept up stacking as well. Caesar was still at a disadvantage in terms of killed soldiers, but his strategy of burning the dogs alive before their masters seemed to work, as the spirits of some of the higher ranking members seemed to waver. In the west, the NCR also strolled along just fine as they mowed down the bandits, soon to arrive at the Paz region. As the Desert Ranger leader Snake Vargas gave green light to get into position for a war with the Jackals, a migration of soldiers was unleashed. The newly trained soldiers during the war with the Vipers would stay at the Citadel region to secure the rest of the unprotected area and be on standby in case they were needed at the front line. The Jackals had expected a war coming to their borders eventually. With their jacked up and doped raiders, they hoped to stand more of a chance than the Vipers did. They were more organized and had better weapons and equipment, but they were now but a shimmer of what they once were before being driven out by the NCR back in the day. Then in the beginning of October, Caesar finally got his war with the Twin Mothers. As the borderline was to the right of the front with the hangdogs, it was easy enough for Caesar to dispatch forces to surround the Twin Mothers area. The Twin Mothers were a peaceful tribe, flourishing in pottery, weaving, and architecture. They lived near cliffs that provided them with necessary protection if raiders would attack them. The hierarchy resembled that of a matriarchy, where the women ruled and governed the establishments, while the men provided food for the tribe by hunting, fishing, or farming. Though their homes were often strong enough to fend off raider packs or creatures, Caesar's army was of a whole different nature. And thus, it did not take long before several villages fell to the swords of Caesar's men. Because the members of the Twin Mothers would still resist, more men needed to be sent in, worrying some of Caesar's advisors if there would be enough reinforcements to aid in the battle with the hangdogs. Preparations for the war with the Jackals was but a week away, and Henry Longstreet, the general who also led his troops during the war with the Vipers, came up with an attacking plan that was ready to be executed. And war continued to roar on throughout the plains of the wastes as the Vault City devoured the Cyclops one by one. The NCR had only one more city to take from the Veil Bandits before moving on to their fellow allies to the south. Morale of the bandits was extremely low, considering they only were able to kill 12 of their enemies. Since weapon supplying was an issue during the last war, Vargas wanted to ensure his troops were well equipped this time. He established small arms companies that would solely focus on the war effort for the time being. The NCR to the west was expanding its own HQ. People believed this was not only to help with the current and upcoming wars, but also to help govern the expanded territory that would be gained by those wars. And then finally, the clash between the Desert Rangers and the Jackals was unleashed. The initial attacks were a great success for the Desert Rangers, with the right flank being able to set the pace and push deeper into Jackal territory. The combat zone was smaller than the war with the Vipers, but the enemy soldiers were fiercer. In the east, the Twin Mothers were dying by the numbers as they were slaughtered by Caesar's men. Caesar reminded some of his advisors how they suggested not to wage two wars at the same time. He fulfilled his promise that he made earlier by crucifying them and letting them die a slow death in the wastes. The war between the Cyclops and the Vault City came to an end with the expected outcome of a victory by the Vault City. For now, there would not be warmongering by the aggressor, as they made it publicly that they had gained enough territory to expand their ever-growing marvel of a city. Though Caesar was having a success with gaining a victory over the Twin Mothers, he was still not able to push further into hangdog territory, with him already losing over 1,000 men. During the first week of the war between the Jackals and the Desert Rangers, fighting was fierce. The line shifted constantly, but not by much, and even was pushed back a little in some places. It was definitely going to be more of a challenge than their previous conflict. In the west, the Veil Bandits had perished and the Paz gang was next. but they stood no chance. The NCR just steamrolled on ahead. Within the first week of November, Caesar had taken the entire Twin Mother region and used his newly gained slaves and forces to march towards reinforcing the front with the hangdogs. The Desert Rangers at the same time had trouble with the Jackals, but were able to chip away at their forces and held territory every other day. The Paz Bandits had only one establishment to hold out at, and lucky for them, it was all the way at the coast. But that did mean that it was all or nothing for them, as the menacing horde of the NCR slowly crept closer. At the end of the month, a big breakthrough occurred for the Desert Rangers, as the army was partially able to break through, though the western flank was having trouble maintaining their position. Due to the preparations in small arms companies, the Desert Rangers' firearm production was able to keep up with the demand of the soldiers stationed at the front. And then as November drew to a close, that what had been feared for a long time happened. Caesar finally broke through the defenses of the hangdogs and marched forward, leaving nothing but death and chaos behind. Though the Desert Rangers were able to push through in the middle, the other areas of the front were less fortunate. The death toll stood pretty equal, with neither side budging an inch. And the Paz Bandits continued to be slaughtered, as their faction would soon be no more. The hangdog territory was massive, meaning that though Caesar had now breached through into their land, it would still take multiple weeks, maybe even months, before the war would be concluded. With Caesar gaining territory, it was obvious for the western factions that war would soon be on their doorstep once more. Preparations were already in order, and the NCR made sure to expand and build several arms workshops to create the necessary weaponry and supplies for that dreadful day. The Desert Rangers had finally gained some more victories to the right side of the previously pushed flank, but were once again at a stalemate, as the front line rose wide yet thin, meaning that the Desert Rangers' superior numbers did not work to their advantage. Finally, at the end of December, the Paz Bandits were pushed to the brink of their final home named La Paz. Their final stand, and therefore their final days, would be witnessed there. Though Caesar had a lot of men at his disposal, it could not be ignored that he lost an incredible amount in the war with the hangdogs. To counter this, he established the Numeri doctrine and vowed for troop training time being decreased. Though this did result in more troops for Caesar's army, their abilities were less than average, including their will to serve, which meant a decrease in stability. At the same time, the NCR finally had claimed victory in their war, which went very well for them overall considered. With the front line being wider than the previous war with the Vipers, Vargas thought it was a good idea to enlist a proper frontline operative to relieve some stress from Longstreet's managing. He chose Angela Death, a ruthless ranger that had countless kills under her name already. She had made quite the career for herself. Vargas hoped by having her a prominent figure at the front line that overall organization and both offensive and defensive morale would increase. This was necessary too, because though the Rangers were able to claim more territory, the death toll was almost exactly the same for both factions. In the north, the Troll Warrens continued to smash the skulls of the Rib Breakers, who were on their last legs before receiving the final killing blow with the Super Mutants claiming their territory. For the foreseeable future, the Troll Warrens were not going to declare war on anyone else, but they issued militarized labor, ensuring them an increased population of recruits. The idea of war would eventually be running through their thick heads again. Using both Longstreet and Angela as the faces of war, the Desert Rangers finally managed to pull off victory after victory, and the end for the Jackals was nearly in sight. The same unfortunate end also seemed to favor the hangdogs. Even though they still had a large chunk of the territory in their own grasp, Caesar was conquering them at a breakneck speed. Then on the 22nd of January, the war between the Jackals and the Desert Rangers finally came to its conclusion, with the Rangers coming out victorious. An amount of 3 states were claimed, and almost 2,000 pieces of equipment were gathered for own use. And with that, the Rangers' territory and influence had expanded once again. They were now double the size of what they once were.